Breaking news spread across the country the morning after Ryan Sky White's death, but long before anyone switched on a TV or opened a news app, one truth had already settled in: she should have been safe. She was working the night shift, earning minimum wage in a place that didn't provide a security guard, didn't install a panic button, and didn't make sure the tools in its maintenance room were locked away. In less than 2 minutes, in a corridor so tight two people couldn't walk side by side, she was stabbed 23 times. She was 27. She was doing her job. And she lost her life in a moment that should never have been allowed to happen. When the public woke up and started to hear what happened, many people felt the same fear deep in their stomach. Anyone who has ever worked late, whether in a hotel, hospital, care center, small shop, or convenience store, felt the shock in a personal way. What happened inside the Red Bridge Inn was not a distant story about policy or politics. It was something that could happen to any worker walking alone through a quiet hallway at night. The Red Bridge Inn sits in the West Midlands, on a road that most people drive past without noticing. 2 floors. Cheap rooms. Simple budget facilities. A place where travelers stay for a night or two. But in recent years, the government converted it into migrant accommodation through an emergency contract. That meant the building, once run like a normal hotel, became a temporary home for asylum seekers waiting for decisions about their cases. For staff like Ryan, the work didn't change much at first: checking people in, answering the phone, folding linen, and trying to stretch wages that barely covered food and rent. But the environment around her changed quietly, without proper structure or preparation. On the night she was killed, at 9:05 p.m., a man staying there under a government asylum placement walked past her desk. Nothing seemed unusual. She didn't call anyone. She didn't feel threatened. He didn't speak or draw attention to himself. But only minutes later, in a service corridor behind the reception area, the night turned violent. The weapon he used was a screwdriver from the hotel's maintenance room, a room that should have been locked but wasn't. In that narrow space, where footsteps echo and no cameras covered the view, the attack happened too fast for anyone to intervene. By the time another staff member rushed toward the noise, Ryan was already on the ground, bleeding. Paramedics arrived quickly, but some things move faster than ambulances. Word spreads fast. Shock spreads even faster. Fear spreads fastest of all. Across the road, her co-worker Chloe Bennett picked up her phone with shaking hands. She didn't know what else to do. She pressed record and managed to say one sentence. She was just doing her job. Why did she have to be the one who died? She posted it live. By midnight, it had reached 3 million views. The hotel that had never been in the news was suddenly at the center of a national conversation. And this time, people were not looking away. This wasn't seen as a random crime. It was seen as something that could have been stopped. Something created by decisions made far away from that corridor. Something caused by promises that turned out to be empty. The government had repeatedly said that risk assessments had been done. That the building was secure. That staff were safe. Workers were assured, everything has been checked. Don't worry. You're safe. But those words collapsed the moment people began asking simple questions. Where was the security guard? Why wasn't the maintenance room locked? Why wasn't there a panic button at the desk? Who made the decision to place asylum seekers and regular staff together in a budget hotel with little oversight, and then insisted it would be fine? Within 1 hour of the news spreading, the street outside filled with neighbors still wearing dressing gowns. They wanted to understand how someone they spoke to hours earlier could be gone. Friends came carrying flowers bought from a petrol station open all night. They stood quietly, forming a small crowd. But the silence didn't last long. Something began to shift as cars arrived from Dudley, Wolverhampton, and Birmingham. Some people didn't know Ryan personally, But they knew the feeling of being ignored by officials who made decisions about their towns without asking what it meant for the people living there. Handwritten signs appeared. Not dramatic slogans, accusations. She worked, you gambled. Security is not paperwork. It is people. If this was your daughter, would this be acceptable? By early morning, the name of one small town was trending above everything else online. And by noon, the story had jumped far beyond that town. In Belfast, crowds gathered outside migrant accommodation centres. In Leeds, a protest that started with a few dozen people doubled and then doubled again. In London, thousands walked towards Westminster Bridge, heading straight for the buildings where asylum decisions are made. Across the country, more than 150,000 people gathered. The message under every protest was the same: a local loss had turned into a shared betrayal. A country was asking, how did we get here? But as the story grew, so did the arguments. Some people focused only on the suspect's immigration status, using the tragedy to push for stricter border rules. Others blamed the government's emergency contracts, saying the hotel system itself was the problem. Online, videos were taken out of context. A small group of protesters throwing objects was labeled asylum seekers attack. Footage of police pushing back crowds was described either as the government crushing dissent, or as officers bravely protecting the vulnerable, depending on who posted it. The truth existed, but it was buried under noise, anger, and manipulated clips. Through all of this, one fact stayed the same: a young woman was dead. And she died because decisions made in distant offices created conditions where tragedy could happen without warning. Police officers managing the crowds were caught in the middle. They weren't simply handling an organized protest. They were standing between grief, anger, fear, and political agendas. Many officers had family members working late shifts. Some had partners in hospitals, sisters in care homes, or parents who immigrated to the country as refugees. Many understood both sides more than anyone realized. At first, police used a soft approach: regular uniforms, no shields or batons. They tried talking to stewards and calming the growing groups. But as more people arrived, tension rose. A bottle was thrown. Someone shoved someone else. A shout turned into a scuffle. Police put on helmets, raised shields, and formed tighter lines. In control rooms, commanders watched screens showing different cities facing the same crisis. The message repeated through radios was clear: do not let crowds reach hotel lobbies. Prevent a second tragedy. And they succeeded. But from the street, people only saw shields and uniforms and thought it was opposition, not protection. Inside the Red Bridge Inn, people who had fled violence in their home countries sat in their rooms listening to new anger rising outside. They peeked through curtains at the crowds, wondering if they were being blamed for a crime they didn't commit. For them, the hotel didn't feel like a political failure. It felt like a trap. Caught in the middle were the workers, the cleaners, receptionists, security staff, and night workers, who had been told they were protected. They remembered the so-called risk assessments. They remembered being told everything was under control. Every time a news channel said secure accommodation, it felt like an insult. Because they knew exactly how secure that corridor had been, not secure enough to save one life. When the government finally responded, a spokesperson stood behind a lectern in London and delivered a statement filled with formal phrases: deep sadness for the loss of life, promise of a full review, praise for emergency workers, request for calm. On paper, it was correct. But in reality, people weren't asking for polite phrases or committees. They wanted honesty. They wanted someone in power to say, "We failed." Not just in general terms, but in direct recognition of a system that told workers to trust it but didn't earn that trust. Without that acknowledgement, frustration grew. Cameras caught the convoy of dark government cars leaving Westminster that evening. Those images, placed next to videos of freezing protesters holding candles, created a story no official statement could contradict. Many felt abandoned. Over the next few days, commentators repeated the same idea. The events surrounding the Red Bridge Inn had opened a ledger the country had avoided for too long. On one side were numbers the government liked to publish: money spent on emergency accommodation, number of hotel beds used, total asylum cases processed. On the other side were things harder to measure: the fear of a night worker walking alone, the anxiety of residents wondering who was living next door, the strained trust of neighbors who felt ignored. When 150,000 people stand outside hotels and government buildings holding flowers and handwritten messages, they are not showing spreadsheets. They are delivering a bill. They are demanding answers. They want officials to stop hiding behind statistics and to finally answer the basic question: who is actually being protected by this system? And who is being asked to carry the risk quietly? As the protests began to slow, a different scene took shape. Volunteers stayed behind to pick up rubbish. They swept broken glass, washed off graffiti, and cleared the streets. Local churches opened their doors for anyone who needed quiet: long-time residents, new arrivals, police officers finishing long shifts, and staff from the hotel who were overwhelmed. Candles lined the pavement outside. People left notes saying, "Thank you for your kindness, we should have kept you safe, and your name will not be forgotten." A sentence spray-painted on a wall started appearing in news photos across the country: "Compassion is the last line of defense." It didn't sound like a slogan. It sounded like a warning. Because this night was never only about one hotel or one crime. It revealed something deeper: a country that talks about safety but too often fails the workers who depend on it. While leaders speak from bright stages, workers stand alone in dark hallways hoping the promises made to them are real. The real question now is not only about asylum policy or border rules. It is more basic and much more important. What kind of country are we building? Are we creating a country that protects everyone properly? Or one where some people carry all the risk while others walk away at 5 p.m., leaving workers like Ryan exposed? Somewhere right now, someone else is working a late shift, maybe in a hotel, maybe in a care home, maybe in a small shop. And they may be wondering if they are safe, too. If you believe this story matters, if you believe what happened to Ryan must never become normal, share this video. Not to start a fight, but to start a conversation. Leave a comment about what should change, who failed first, and why. Your voice matters. Become part of this moment, because this story is not finished. The real consequences of that night are only beginning.